Hi, welcome to Ultimate Wildlife Gardens. My name's Chris Caligari. Old, wrinkly, past the best before date? No, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about this. These apples now at the moment are falling fast, and it's very tempting to say, oh, we better clear those up, but it's very important that we don't, because there are species which will be very glad of those fallers, especially later on in the year. At the moment, this is October, the apples are fairly plentiful, but later on in the year, some of the later varieties, it's particularly important to leave some on the floor. Things like fieldfares, redwings, they're coming in from overseas, they're very glad to feed off those. Blackbirds like them, thrushes will sometimes go for them, blackcaps will eat them, and also some butterflies. They like to feed on the sugary juices that come off. Now if you haven't got an apple tree, there's an alternative. I've been doing something about the last 30-40 years. I can't honestly remember if it's my original idea or not, but if we take an apple like this, a faller, a vini, which this one is about 3 or 4 inches long. You can get these at Screwfix and all sorts of DIY places. Simply push it through the middle of the core. It's important it goes through the middle so that it doesn't drop off. Screw it into a block of wood, and you can give yourself an instant apple tree wherever it suits you. It might be on a tree, it might be on your bird feeder, wherever. But birds will be grateful for this. I say it isn't particularly this time of year, but shortly coming up. It can be a little bit expensive if you're using supermarket apples, but you might well have apples which are spoilt. They're going to be discarded anyway, and it's great to put those up in the trees. In a wildlife garden I used to have blackcaps, and they were regularly at these. One little tip I learnt, I used to hang them up with an S-hook like this, which made it very convenient for changing the apples. Hang that on there, imagining there aren't any apples left. The slight problem I had was that squirrels, when food's scarce, at the moment they won't be taking them, but they will go for them. Now I can't help that, but unfortunately the little devils tend to unhook them and they carry the whole lot off. I don't mind losing an apple, but it's a nuisance when I have to wait several weeks to find where they've dropped the holder for the thing. Now, I've said about leaving the apples on the ground because lots of species will be glad to feed on those, but of course this channel is about ecology, and so we really want to be thinking a little bit beyond the obvious, the redwings, the fieldfares, etc., which I've already mentioned. Many creatures will feed on the fallen apples, so even though they're very decayed, there are going to be many tiny animals which are going to feed on them. There's going to be fungi, there's going to be slugs, there's going to be snails. Now, fortunately, we don't have to be an expert in all these various species, but as ecologists, we know that there are a myriad of species which will feed off those fallen apples. It's a really important resource, and also, following our ecological principles, we know that if we take an apple, for example, which has fallen on the floor, excuse the traffic going past, I'm recording at the front of the house. If we take something like fruit flies, you might think, well, we're not particularly interested in conserving them. No, of course not. But they, of course, will fly around, and they will be food for spiders, and the spiders will be food for the wrens. So we need to think ecologically about the whole thing. Now this tree, this house, I've only built about 4 years ago, but this tree was already here, and we've been able to work around it and keep it. But you do sometimes get what we call happy accidents. Bob Ross, a hero of mine, the late Bob Ross, a great art teacher on television, on YouTube. He used to talk about happy accidents, and this is one such example, a particularly good one, because this apple tree, behind it is a forsythia and a lilac. They've been there many years, and it's right in the corner behind the apple tree. It doesn't affect me at all, but it's very matted together, all the stems are together, it's a real thicket. Now, although I'm at the front of the garden, and this isn't really the main part of the wildlife garden, obviously the ethos is the same, that we try and create and permit habitats to exist wherever we possibly can. So this thicket at the back of this apple tree, which I'll put a shot on now, it looks like nothing, but I have seen a hedgehog, a local resident hedgehog, going in there, and I have every hope that it's going to be overwintering in there. I don't know. My ethos is always one of wildlife first. I won't look in there, I won't disturb it. I don't need to disturb that space at all. The wildlife has a right to that corner. I'll leave it in peace. I like to think that it's residing in there. Okay, so this time of year, October, we need to be, although there are still plenty of flowers around, etc., we need to be thinking about how we can help wildlife to get through the forthcoming bad weather, where food is scarce and protection's needed. At the front of the house here, I have a wildlife furge, which I sowed from seed. It's just gone through its second year. Very successful, very pretty. Now, it's not looking quite so attractive. Lots of dead seed heads, lots of greenery still at the bottom, and some might be tempted to cut it, to tidy it. Now that I won't do. Not for as long as I can possibly leave it. I'll do it before the new growth comes through in the spring, but at the moment all this dead growth provides protection. I don't think there's very much of a seed left, but give everything a chance to seed down, and lots of species, including all these tiny species which we neglect but are an important part of the ecosystem, they're going to be in the bottom of there, protected by the dead foliage, etc. And so it's important to leave them. Sorry, another car. Generally speaking, I don't record at the front here, because it is a little bit noisy, and I'm something of a hermit, so I don't greatly like to be here, out with the traffic going past, etc. So this front is largely ornamental, but I still have a rowan tree, or I do have a rowan tree now, because there used to be one next door, but it got cut down because it was felt to be too close to the house. Now on that rowan, that's one place I could guarantee to see lots of winter visitors, like the field fares and redwings, coming to feed. So I've planted a young one, which is in a position where it should be okay for many years to come. And although it's very young at the moment, hardly any fruit on it, in a few years I hope it will make a worthwhile contribution. If space permits, one of my favourite trees that I'd recommend is the hazel. It's much overlooked, but it is a most wonderful tree. It's fairly quick growing, and it has lots of advantages. I suppose one of the main advantages, the reasons why I'd grow it, is because it is owl food, it's kestrel food, it's all sorts of birds of prey are going to benefit from this. Why? Well, I'm sure that you can work it out for yourself. It's because of the hazelnuts, and a mature tree will start producing large quantities of hazelnut. They're fairly quick to establish, fairly quick to grow. So they're useful from that point of view. Another reason why I've used them many times in my wildlife gardens is because if you want to have a mini woodland and space is limited, you might have room for one of these hazel trees, and that will cast shade down below, and so you're starting to get woodland conditions. Now I'll show you underneath this tree what we've got, and I think you'll be impressed. Well, to be honest, I think when I said you'd probably be impressed, that was probably overstating it rather. But I think you might well like it. The fact that under here there are lots of nuts which have dropped. And of course these are going to be marvellous food for the small mammals, and we have plenty here because we have conditions to suit them. And that means that we have plenty of owls, we have plenty of kestrels, we have lots of birds of prey. Also here, close by, we have a rock pile. Now the two fit very nicely together because beneath that there will be an awful lot of opportunities for small mammals, which is exactly what we want because we want the food chains. And those food chains make for a most wonderful garden. You can see that underneath here it is actually very, very dark, and that will suit things like primroses and violets. We can create a mini woodland on a tiny scale. Bluebells, foxgloves, these are species which I wouldn't say like the shade, but they don't get out-competed for resources, and so it suits them. And perhaps you can hear above my head robin singing, which is rather nice, one of its favourite haunts here. I've changed locations now. I'm actually just below the nut tree, the nut trees on the rock pile, and this is perhaps a good time to bring in the subject of small mammals, rodents, etc., because the nuts are obviously very important for many small mammals, and we have plenty here, and it's very, very important that we have a healthy small mammal population. Around here we have sparrowhawks, buzzards, kestrels, many species, tawny owls, and they're all dependent upon us having a healthy small mammal population. Also resident in the wildlife area, we've got grass snakes, and they too will be feeding on small mammals. So they're very, very important. Now sometimes, I've come across it many times, people are a little bit afraid of having mammals, mice particularly, but in fact we're talking about shrews and voles as well. They're a little bit worried about having them close to the house. Now, in a healthy ecosystem, which this is, there is no problem, and I can say, hand on heart, that I have not the slightest problem. One does have to be sensible, because a matter of 10 yards from that rock pile, and the myriad of creatures, I've got my wild bird seed, I've got garden seeds, I've got my vegetable garden, I've got all the things that you would expect. I have no problem with the rodents because I make sure that my storage facilities are good. Only once did I have a problem when I had to live trap a small mouse which had got in, but that was through my own foolishness because I was working and I left the door open for a long period of time and it must have crept in there. But there is no problem, and in fact it is essential that we have these small mammals. We mustn't exclude them because we want maximum biodiversity, and we therefore must have them. Another topic which I often hear mentioned is the dreaded word rats. Now, rats are endemic across the world, really. But I'm talking about my location here in the UK, and the rats are not a problem because I have a healthy, dropping H's, that's the old Hereford side of me, because we have a healthy ecosystem, and we have plenty of natural restraints which will stop them from over proliferating. I've never seen a rat here, but of course we will have them. They're not a thing to fear. In fact, if we don't have rats in our ecosystem, there's something very wrong, and we cannot call it a healthy situation. So, small mammals, never a problem. I mentioned squirrels earlier on. They can be a little bit of a nuisance, but they are no problem. Now, I'm producing a video on what we might call pests, which includes the rats and the mice and the pigeons and the squirrels and all the rest of it. I can hand on heart say I have no problem with pests because none of them cause me any problems. Not because of any secret I've got, but it's simply a question of managing the risk. And over the years, because I have wrinkles indicate, I have a fair bit of experience, and so I know how to mitigate, so I never get any problems. I mustn't go into it now because I too tend to go off on tangents. I'm sorry about that. For another video, we'll deal with pests. But foxes are another. I've had chickens all my life. I haven't got any here actually, but all my life I've had chickens. I've never lost a single chicken to a fox, in spite of the fact that all the areas I've lived in, foxes were common. Many, many foxes. It's all to do with husbandry and the care you take. Anyway, I mustn't diverge. We're talking about the small mammals here, and they really must be encouraged. And there's no reason why you can't have them living close to your house, and there'll be no problem at all. They will encourage the predators. The predators will keep them under control, and we'll have a healthy ecosystem where everything is in balance, as it should be. Now this is one of my favourite scenes. This is a mature ivy plant which tends to get cut down, unfortunately, in many instances, but if it's allowed to flower at this late time of the year, it is absolutely invaluable for nectar feeders. On here at this minute, if you can make them out, I've got about half a dozen red admirals, lots of bees. This is the only place as well where reliably every sort of October time when the flowers are out, I can see hornets, which I don't see very often. They're quite scarce. Much misunderstood insects, sometimes feared wrongly because they are really very docile animals. They look fearsome, but actually they're very docile animals. They're very, very reluctant to sting you. And they will scout along. I'll keep looking in case we're lucky enough to see one now. But this ivy is absolutely packed at the moment with honeybees. A little bit earlier in the week there were also a lot of wasps on here, but the wasps' nests are dying out. There's still a few, but ivy is one of the most wonderful plants. It's wonderful not just on account of this as a pollen producer, but in so many different ways. It's such a tragedy when people treat it as just a garden pest, a garden weed. Sometimes it might need a little bit of handling to stop it getting out of hand, but if you can find space for it, it's a wonderful plant. Not just for the pollen and nectar, which the animals absolutely love, but later on it will also provide berries, a favourite food for the birds, probably other insects as well, other animals as well. It's great for nesting. Robins, wrens, one of their favourite places. Also things like the holly blue, part of its life cycle needs ivy. So it's a really, really valuable plant. If you can find space for it, it is so well worthwhile. If you have a garden and you have garden plants in it, then things like cedar, Michaelmas daisies, during this late season, and many other things, they're great, they're valuable, but ivy is surely, for me, the ultimate. it'll do well. You don't have to manage it, you don't have to do anything with it, except maybe stop it getting too boisterous in the wrong situation. If you can let it go, let it go. This is actually a stone wall that it's scrambling over. It's been here many, many years. It does no harm. So those that say, oh dear, 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 ivy, so destructive, I'm not going to say it's totally harmless, but surely we can find spaces for our native ivy. Whilst we're on the topic of ivies, this is one of my favourite situations where I've used an ivy many times over the years. This is a conifer, a pine, which I inherited. Our house has only been built 4 years, but we kept it because we were able to. It wasn't too much in the way, we had to work round it. But conifers, I wouldn't say they're of no use, but it's very limited the species that actually use them. Some use them for nesting, such as in this particular case, we have doves and pigeons which occasionally use them, and if you're lucky enough to get goldcrests, they will often, they very much like to use conifer trees. Goldcrests, you might say, well, we don't see goldcrests. Well, actually, there are quite a few of them around, and we've certainly got them around here. If you pub quiz time, if you say to people what's the smallest bird in this country, the UK, most people would say wrens. Well, actually it's a goldcrest, and they are wonderful, wonderful little birds, and they like conifers to nest in. So I would say that conifers are lowish grade of conservation value, but they've got a place. But what I like to do is double them up and use them as a support for ivy, thus making them so much more valuable. This is one of the pieces that is absolutely essential, which I've forgotten, so which I have to clumsily add in on the end of the video. When I'm talking about ivy, it's got so many good points that I can't always think of them immediately off the top of my bald head. But a very, very important feature of ivy is the protective environment that it creates. So that tree which I showed you, the conifer, now the conifer gives protection all year round. A lot of the trees are bare, but the conifer is obviously keeping their leaves, and with ivy growing through it, it's a wonderful place. So the butterflies and things that we enjoy, and the many other creatures, will go in there and they will have safe protection. The number of times I've come across owls roosting in ivy covered trees because it offers them protection, it gives them warmth, it gives them seclusion. So it's from the tiniest creatures right through to the largest. Ivy, overgrown places, absolutely marvellous for wildlife. So if we want our butterflies, our small tortoiseshells, our red admirals, our peacocks, they may go into our houses and shelter in the curtains, but frequently they'll be buried deep inside a holly bush or an ivy bush or something of that sort. Ivy, okay, I love the plant. I'm overselling it, I apologise. I move back again now to close to the pond, in fact overlooking the pond, and there's a couple of essential things which I should have mentioned earlier on, so I'm fitting it in now with an almost invisible bit of editing. I don't think so. But essential. I've got in this pond, because it's newly established, I haven't got a really huge growth of oxygenating plants yet. Early in the season I installed an electric pump. It's solar powered, and I kept it running really throughout the summer to make sure there's just a little drop for the water to go back in, circulating round, but to make sure that the pond was kept oxygenated. Now, it's important that the pump is turned off at this time of year in early autumn, because in ecology we know that there are some organisms which overwinter in the bottom of the pond, and so maintaining a relatively warm layer in the bottom of the pond is essential for their survival. Toads can spend the winter in the mud. Now, if we have a pump which is taking water from deeper down in the pond, then obviously you're taking that warmer water, bringing it up to the top and circulating it round. So effectively we're cooling the bottom of the pond. Now that's something that we don't want to do. So therefore, just earlier on in the week in fact, although it's a mild autumn, I've turned the pump off, just ready for the winter to come on. Another thing which I don't do is break the ice on the pond. I know it's sometimes tempting to give the wildlife an opportunity to drink, and so to break the ice would seem to be logical. Personally, I don't. I don't ever touch the ice, I don't disturb it. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, breaking the ice is bound to cause an awful lot of disturbance within the pond. The vibrations, the noise, it must be deafening to sensitive otoscopic organs, etc., pressure sensors. I don't want to disturb it. And also, I feel that the ice stops the water being disturbed, so it helps to maintain the warmer layers of water down below. But of course I do try and look after the wildlife as far as drinking water goes, essential during the bad weather, during cold weather. And so I have a bird bath, which naturally, teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here I know, but naturally I do every day, make sure that I put some warm water in to melt the ice, to make sure they've always got water. And for those that can't reach the bird bath, which is elevated obviously to keep the birds safe from predators that are going to harm them, I also keep a bowl of water low down, which again I make sure I keep free of ice during the cold weather, but so that if, let us say, a hedgehog, sometimes they will emerge during the winter if we have a mild spell, and other animals will be glad of a drink. So I do make provision for those as well. Now, there are many things which are really important, which I haven't had a chance to mention. The video is going to go on for too long if I try and touch on them now. So part 2, if you care to watch it, I cover some really, I think, essential stuff relating to wildflower meadows and other aspects of looking after the wildlife at this time of year. And so if you could join me for that, I'd be grateful. I'll possibly give a little bit of a guide, because it might give the impression on this video that I'm talking about rolling acres of land here. It's really quite a small space, but I've got an awful lot of different types of habitat in it, and therefore I've got an awful lot of wildlife. And I keep jumping around from place to place, but I'll try and give a general view, or more generalised view, of the wildlife area in part 2. I'm also, as I said, dealing with wildflower meadows, grasslands, etc. I'll be touching on that. So I'll be very grateful if you could join me for the next part of this, part 2 of the early autumn video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and if you could press the like button, I'd be extremely grateful. If you could subscribe to the channel, that would be even better, and perfect if you would be kind enough to share it, because although you may be aware of many of these things, there may be people who aren't, and the more people that we can spread the word to about the benefits of wildlife gardening, then surely it's for the good. Thanks ever so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.